Missouri man, Marcellus Williams, was executed by lethal injection Tuesday evening, despite some objections by the local prosecutor, whose office had secured his 2003 murder conviction. There were also objections from the victim's family. The man, Marcellus Williams, was 55 and he had been convicted for the 1998 killing of a woman who was stabbed in a home burglary in St. Louis. Williams's attorneys had raised questions over jury selection at the trial and the handling of evidence in the case, including contamination issues affecting DNA tests. Williams maintained his innocence for decades. He sought clemency in his final days from the governor, as well as a stay of execution from the state Supreme Court. Both were denied. Williams was ultimately executed in a state prison in Bonne Terre, Missouri. Defending his decision to deny clemency, Governor Mike Parson wrote in part, quote, "Nothing from the real facts of this case have led me to believe in Mr. Williams' innocence as such. Mr. Williams' punishment will be carried out as ordered by the Supreme Court." Parson added, quote, "Capital punishment cases are some of the hardest issues we have to address in the governor's office. But when it comes down to it, I follow the law and trust the integrity of our judicial system."
Many were furious with the state's decision. Democratic Representative Cori Bush wrote, quote, "Governor Mike Parson shamefully allowed an innocent man to be executed tonight. We must abolish this flawed, racist, inhumane practice once and for all. Rest in power, Marcellus Williams. Hashtag abolish the death penalty." The Innocence Project tweeted, "Missouri has executed Marcellus Khalifa Williams despite serious doubts about the integrity of his conviction. Our hearts are with Marcellus, his loved ones." His final statement was, "All praise be to Allah in every situation." Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris has so far been silent on the death penalty this election cycle, despite vocally opposing it for nearly 2 decades. Look, here's what I don't understand, and I'm going to absolutely slam Cori Bush here, and even the Innocence Project, which I think does excellent work. There is no doubt that this man committed this crime. It is not just based on DNA evidence. It is based on that he told multiple people, including his girlfriend at the time, and then he had belongings of the murdered women in his possession. He had her computer. There is no real doubt that he committed this crime. Now, you can be opposed to the death penalty. I am myself, I would say, weakly opposed to it, whereas ideally I would not have it because we have in the past executed people wrongfully. I know that that does happen, and we cannot, as a society, as a government, make right to someone we have executed, because sometimes evidence does emerge later. So I would not personally condone the death penalty as a policy. I think in cases of where the guilt is overwhelming, perhaps school shooter, like if they execute the Boston bomber or the Parkland shooter or any of those, that's fine. I don't care. I have no problem with that. I'm not opposed to people being, I guess, killed as a punishment when their guilt is overwhelming. So in this case, again, you can say we should not have the death penalty, but it is totally clear to me that he did it. And I think everyone is being a little naive in not processing that fact.
So I think 2 things. One is there is an issue of contamination, excuse me, of the murder weapon, and it appears to have DNA from investigators on it, which is questionable. Then there's a separate issue about the jury selection and the exclusion of black people from the jury. That being said, I know that Williams' team was hoping that the DNA evidence would be more exculpatory than it proved to be. There was a suggestion that the quote-unquote real killer's DNA was on it. That was not the case. Now, in his particular case, I don't think that his innocence has been proven. Now, there is significant evidence of guilt in his case. The issue I have is twofold. One is I just think morally the death penalty diminishes people, diminishes us as a society. And the other point that I worry about, excuse me, is the idea that there are not only errors in the justice system, but inequalities in the justice system. And it has been, for example, the case for a long time that black defendants are more likely to have the death penalty leveled against them. Now, that to my mind, argues against the death penalty. You were talking about instances that you don't really object to it. For me, if someone murders a small child and the evidence is overwhelming, do I shed any tears on their behalf? Not really. Right. But trying to detach those sort of visceral emotional reactions from it a little bit, I don't think it is to the greater good of society to have it there.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, but this crime was as brutal as the murder of a child. I mean, this was a random, this woman whom he killed. This was not someone known to him. He broke into her house while she was in the shower. She came out of the bathroom. She thought she heard something. She called, "Is anyone there?" Then he appeared and stabbed her dozens and dozens of times with a knife. Brutal, awful crime. Stole some of her things, had them in his possession for a long period of time, then confessed later to a fellow inmate. He was arrested for something else. And in that situation, I get it, because people, people who are also facing criminal indictment could make up a story in order to get themselves a more favorable situation. So that alone wouldn't be persuasive to me. But then they talked to his former girlfriend, who said that he did it, and he threatened her if she would go forward and say. And then they found the belongings of the murdered woman in his possession, like 6 ways to Sunday. So I just have no doubt that he did it, and it was a brutal, random, senseless crime. But I hear you on the death penalty. I don't necessarily think the government ought to be trusted with that power. And of course, there are inequalities, and people. It's not so much for murder necessarily. We do prosecute murder pretty aggressively, I think, regardless of skin color. But there's all sorts of lesser crimes that you're more likely to become involved with and prosecuted for if you're poor or a minority. I hear all that, and maybe we shouldn't have it. And locking somebody up in prison for their whole life is a pretty awful punishment too. I mean, there are some people, in jail for the rest of their lives who would rather be. I mean, people kill themselves in prison who'd rather be dead than be locked up.
In the Marcellus Williams case, though, I mean, the fact that the victim's family did not want him executed, that gives me pause, perhaps more pause than it gives you. But I think if you're taking the argument that part of the reason for the death penalty is retribution, and I'm not saying that even in a denigratory way, retribution. You can argue whether that should be a part of the justice system or not. But doesn't the fact that her family didn't want him executed weigh on you to any extent? I mean,
maybe, not really, because it's a crime. It's my opinion of what I like. It's not, the justice is not based on what
the victim wants.
The will of the victim wants. It's based on what the state determines. Do I think that? So I don't really think retribution should be the main goal of the justice system. I think I think protection honestly should be the main. Probably we should not waste our own taxpayer resources locking people up if they are not a threat to society.
So okay, I thought you were going to make a separate argument there, which was it's cheaper to kill people than lock them up.
That's not the case, because for the death penalty we have to have. I mean, they've been trying to. He was convicted in 2000, like 20 years ago.
Yeah, right.
It's taking that long. I mean, it costs It costs way more money to do all of the trials and the appeals and the litigation. The process goes on forever. It's far more costly. And then the last thing I will say on this, I do think that the method we use to execute people is awful and inhumane and should not be done. The lethal injection, the multi-drug cocktail thing is an attempt to wash our hands of what we're actually doing, which is killing another person, and they've tried to make it medical, like it's some kind of health procedure that they inject you. We don't know that this is painless, by the way.
Right.
Sometimes people survive it. It gets botched all the time.
People react physically violently at times.
This is going to sound graphic, but it is absolutely not more humane than shooting someone in the head. It's just not. We're pretending it is.
Yep.
We're making ourselves feel better about ourselves, but we have actually just come up with, in my view, more horrific ways to execute people than what they had available in the French Revolution.
I just think discussing, I mean, yes, there is an issue there, but discussing what's the most humane way to kill people is just a little macabre for my taste.
All right, more Rising right after this.